Democrats pushing forward to get the Mueller report. They have now voted formally to subpoena it if Attorney General Bill Barr doesn't hand it over.
I will give him time to change his mind. But if we cannot reach an accommodation, then we will have no choice but to issue subpoenas for these materials.
Judiciary Chair Nadler, who we spoke with on this broadcast last night, saying today that basically he wants to work on this in a negotiated way. So he's providing time to the Attorney General before they make good on what they did today. So they have the authority, the power to move forward on the subpoena. They just haven't issued it yet. Nadler also insisting he doesn't see a middle ground on this. The Congress needs the full report, no redactions, or they will take this to court.
Are you willing to negotiate any middle ground in terms of redactions of the Mueller? You're not?
No. The committee must see everything. Obviously, some material will have to be redacted before it's released to the public to protect privacy, to protect the various rights. But the committee is entitled and must see all the material.
That's not all. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee moving forward on subpoenas for the people you see right here, including people who are known to be close to Trump at critical moments like Hope Hicks and Steve Bannon. So with this report currently hidden both from Congress and the public, we're also seeing a shift in how people view what Mueller's done. Now, I want to be clear. This is an online poll from Lawfare, not NBC polling, but it is interesting. They looked at what the views were before Mueller's report was out, where 19% of Republicans said they had confidence in Mueller's fairness and objectivity. More than 60% of Democrats said they did have that kind of confidence. And now, with reports of what's in the report, although we haven't seen it yet, look at this shift. 55% of Republicans now have confidence in Mueller, apparently buoyed by Barr's description of what he found, and Democrats dropping off a little bit. I will know the swing is larger among Republicans than Democrats. Now, it's not clear what everyone will think when we actually see the findings in the full report. House Democrats are turning up the heat, though, and they're moving ahead with related investigations, including Trump's inaugural committee, which spent famously more than most others, $100 million. The House Intel Committee now looking to interview an inaugural organizer named Stephanie Winston Wolkoff. She also was an advisor to the First Lady. Now, she's been subpoenaed, relatedly, in a federal grand jury case in Manhattan and has also spoken with the feds in New York since last fall. All of this, of course, tees off the investigation into Michael Cohen. And in a moment, we will be joined by New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who serves on the Judiciary Committee and works with Nancy Pelosi in leadership. So a lot to get to. But I want to begin with our panelists, Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root, Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham, and Natasha Bertrand, staff writer for The Atlantic and an MSNBC contributor, who also is joining, we should note, Politico as a national security correspondent. Congratulations.
Thanks, Ari.
You'll get the first question along with your apparent promotion. What does it mean that Chairman Nadler is not trying to preserve any perception of waiting or going slow or negotiating in that way? He's clearly trying to show the DOJ he means business.
Yeah, I think that it's very typical Nadler, right? He's never been one to kind of beat around the bush on this. He's very straightforward. He wants answers. He wants to see the full Mueller report. Him and the rest of the committee are very perplexed as to why Bill Barr would have come out and written this 4-page summary before even releasing the report itself to Congress. He thinks that that gave the Trump administration an unnecessary head start and has allowed them to shape the narrative here. And so they're also pointing to the president, I think, and this is, I think, where Nadler is drawing a bit of inspiration, that Republicans set during the 115th Congress, in which they demanded documents about the Hillary Clinton email investigation, about the ongoing Russia investigation from the Justice Department, and in many cases actually got those documents. And so Nadler now is playing the same kind of hardball with the DOJ that the Republicans played last year and before, and he believes, and the House Intelligence Committee believes this too, that they are entitled to a similar, if not greater, level of transparency given the urgency of this report that the Republicans were with regard to the origins of the Russia investigation.
Jason?
Look, I'm just glad that the Democrats are showing some backbone. I mean, it would seem for a long time we were getting this sort of like, all right, we need it by tomorrow. Well, maybe not tomorrow. Well, maybe later. Well, maybe when you show up. And so it's good that they have finally sort of pulled out the sort of Damocles. If you don't do this, we're going to send a subpoena. But let's be honest, the subpoena, unless there is something added to it about timeliness, you can still issue a subpoena and Barr can still say it's going to take me weeks. It's going to take me a couple days. So there needs to be a push above and beyond just a subpoena on how fast you want this to come across. And also, I think this is a reflection of another communication screw up by the Trump administration. If they were smart, they could have taken the Mueller report and put it in a room like TPP and said, look, everybody can go see it. We're just not going to release it publicly. You can go in there, don't take pictures, don't take notes. So it's mismanagement. There is a public good to this, but I hope this moves quickly because a subpoena will not be enough to get this out.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I think that if nothing else, the committee, the Judiciary Committee, must see the full report. I wrote a book that was roughly 200 pages. If someone tried to summarize my book in 4 pages, it would be grossly inadequate and clearly not hit the point. And so I think that's the crux of the argument. I do believe that there should be some timeliness, but I mean, Mueller took his dear sweet time. I think the American public, Democrats and Republicans, actually want to move forward in some capacity. Trump obviously says it's the Democrats constantly picking on me. The Democrats are saying you're more corrupt than anyone we've ever seen, so we constantly have to, go after you. But if we can have respected elected officials from a particular committee, not all 538 members of Congress looking at the report necessarily right now, but if we could have the members of the committee looking at the full report and making their assessment, I think the American public on both sides of the aisle would feel a lot more comfortable.
Natasha, on that point, the chairman has been making a lot of news with his stance. We spoke with him last night. Take a listen to Jerry Nadler on the beat last night.
He's hiding behind the rules, and the redactions. Listen, he auditioned for this job. Remember, the president got rid of Sessions as Attorney General because he wouldn't protect him. He fired Comey because he wouldn't protect him and give him the loyalty he wanted. He tried to fire Mueller. He clearly wanted, and he said he wanted an Attorney General who would be his Roy Cohn, who would protect him personally.
Natasha, briefly on that, what is the point their Democrats are trying to make on Barr?
That he's been conflicted from the beginning, which I think most people who are most Democrats anyway would definitely agree with Nadler there. The 20-page, 19-page memo that he wrote last July that was completely unsolicited was all about the obstruction inquiry, right? So it's not necessarily surprising that he would have come to this conclusion in the 2-day period that he had to read over Mueller's report. But I think another person that's kind of escaped scrutiny here is Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein apparently consulted with Barr to determine whether or not the president obstructed justice when Rod Rosenstein actually wrote the memo that was used to justify Jim Comey's firing. And so that, clearing the president of obstruction of justice could also be a little bit self-serving for Rod Rosenstein because he is a witness in that aspect of this inquiry. And so you have 2 highly conflicted people here who are making a very serious judgment based on, findings from an investigation that was supposed to be apolitical, but it went to 2 political appointees to draw this conclusion.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.